Hi everyone, this is Heather. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I've got some card tutorials for you and we're going to be making some cards with just pattern paper. There won't be any stamping. For these cute cat and dog cards, I'm using some new pattern papers from Stampin Up. This is their Playful Pets Papers. For the cat card, I wanted to make a little scene inside of a house. Look like there's wallpaper on the walls and a wood grain floor, a little cat playing, and this cat doesn't look too happy about it. Another little kitty cat on the wall. The dog card's a little more abstract. I've got the wood grain background, a heart shape, some pattern paper in a rectangle, and a little bit of ribbon. One of the things I really like to do when I'm not doing a lot of stamping, if I'm just using pattern paper and dies like I am today, I like to add some texture and embellishment. It just gives them a little bit of an extra oomph and add some more detail, layers, and texture. For the wood grain detail on these cards, I'm using the Pine Wood Planks embossing folder from Stampin' Up. It's got a really great wood texture and some plank designs and makes really nice details. I'm also using a few dies that have some faux stitching on them, using a stitched rectangle, a stitched square, and a stitched heart. All are from Stampin' Up as well. Before we get started making our cards, real quick, I wanted to flip through the papers to show you what's available. So there's two different cat patterns. You get two of each of the patterns. There's two different dog patterns. One kind of has small dogs and one has bigger dogs. Then there's accessory sheets, one for cats and one for dogs. And then there is pattern on the back. This one has words for cats and dogs. Then there's paw prints with hearts and red and white stripes. Little fish and hearts. And little lines. I think these look like kind of stray pieces of fur kind of flying. It's a really nice texture. So I'm going to start making the cat card first. For the base of both of these cards, I've taken a sheet of Stampin' Up! Real Red cardstock, cut it in half, and scored both sides for my card bases. On the cat accessory paper and a piece of craft cardstock, I've used a large stitched rectangle die, and I've gone ahead and die cut those out. It just adds like a nice little faux stitching detail to add a little bit of extra texture. This die measures approximately 5 1/4 by 3 3/4. I've also got a strip of the words with a little piece of black for my sentiment, and a strip of ribbon that is the same width as the pattern paper, so it's about 5 1/4 wide. From one of the cat papers, I've gone ahead and cut around the 3 cats that I'm going to be using on my card. The first thing that I'm going to do is run this craft sheet through the embossing folder. These embossing folders are 6 by 6, so I really like that you can either do it vertically or horizontally, depending on which way you want the wood grain to go, because they're wide enough to do that. I want my piece to be horizontal, so I'm just going to lay it inside the embossing folder, close it, and run this through my die cutting machine. So here's my piece after I've run it through the embossing folder. I love all that fantastic texture that it adds. So you can have a wood grain textured paper from any color cardstock that you have. Next, I'm going to trim down my papers I'm using for my background. I'm going to trim my wood grain down to 1 3/4 inches. And the pattern paper down to 2 3/4 inches. And one quick note about the trimming, make sure that you leave your stitched edge across the top of the pattern paper and across the bottom of the wood grain. You might not be able to see it on camera, but you can see the texture in real life. I've applied tape runner to both of the pieces. I'm going to take the wood grain and place it at the base of my card. Press that down. Then I'm going to place the pattern paper over top, and it is going to overlap that wood grain just a little bit. Next, I'm going to apply the red grosgrain ribbon. So I'm going to take my tape dispenser and run that right along where those two pattern papers meet, and place my ribbon down over the tape. And that's going to form the baseboard and the wallpaper for our scene. Next, I'm going to cut out the images. Sometimes you'll hear people call this fussy cutting, and that just means cutting out your images. So even though I am left-handed, I cut with my right hand. That was just how I was taught when I was a kid. One of the biggest tips that I have for cutting out your images is to hold your scissors in your hand straight up and move your paper instead of moving your scissors around the image. I know that cutting things out that are really detailed, it does take a little bit of practice, but maybe just get some scrap paper, stamp out some images, or maybe some pattern paper that you don't mind cutting up, and just sit down and practice cutting out. I always like to leave a little bit of a white border around my images, usually about 1/4 of an inch. And so I'm just going to cut in. And as you'll see, I'm turning the paper more than I am the scissors. And just take your time and go around those details. Try and leave the same amount of white around everything that you can. When you get to really delicate parts like the whiskers, just go really slow. Another thing I recommend is trying to make more curved cuts than straight cuts, if that makes sense. It just looks a little bit more natural. And I will periodically cut away that excess just so that it's not in my way while I'm cutting. And I'm just going to continue around and cut out this little grubby cat. Be careful going around the whiskers. As you can see, I'm just turning the paper, keeping my scissors pretty straight on. I'm going to cut that little piece off. And you don't have to worry about every little tiny detail. This kitty has kind of a fluffy tail. I'm just kind of giving an approximation of cutting around the image. And here's what my finished kitty cat looks like all cut out. I'm going to do the same thing to the black cat, and I'm going to cut out one of the little mouse toys as well. Here are my cutout images, and another tip that I have, if you are having trouble cutting out images from pattern paper because maybe it feels like the paper's too thin, you might be tearing it, before you fussy cut out the image, you can glue it to a piece of lightweight cardstock and then cut both pieces out at the same time. That'll give it a little bit more stability and might make it a little bit easier for you to cut. For the cute little Siamese cat that I wanted to look like she was in a picture frame, I'm using the smallest stitched square die from Stampin' Up. I'm going to place that where I would like it to be, put a little piece of washi tape on there, run that through my die cutting machine, and cut that out. And now I've got that perfect square with a little bit of faux stitching, and I wanted to add a little bit of a wooden frame. So I'm going to take that same die, and on the scrap of wood grain that we had left over that we trimmed away, I'm going to trace the outside of the die with my pencil, take my scissors and cut that out. And now I can adhere that on, and it gives a nice little wood frame around the kitty picture. I wanted to add just a little bit of sort of a sentiment on the card. So I'm taking some of the text paper, and I'm going to take my scissors and cut out the love meow. I'm going to use a little glue pen to put some adhesive on the back, and I'm going to place that on a little scrap of black cardstock, making sure I leave a little bit of a border around it, and take my scissors and trim that away. I've placed foam tape on the back of the two cat images in the picture frame. Place those in my scene. I'm going to put the picture frame in the upper left hand corner, and going back to my glue pen, I'm going to put a little bit of adhesive on the words and put that in the upper right hand corner, and also on the little cat toy, and I'm going to place that in the scene. And here's the finished cat card. And now we're ready to move on to the dog card. I have the other half of that red paper for the cardstock base. I've got a piece of the dog accessory paper, the dog word paper, and some brown cardstock. I've also cut out 2 of the dogs from the pattern paper, and I have some black and white twine and thin red ribbon that have each been cut to about 18 inches. I'm going to use one of the tall, skinny stitched heart dies and cut a piece out of the dog pattern paper. For the words, I've got one of the stitched rectangle dies that measures 3.5 by 2 1/4. And then just like I did for the cat card, I'm going to run this paper through my embossing folder. Here are all my die cut and embossed pieces. On the piece of black, I'm going to apply some tape runner, and I'm going to adhere that down towards the bottom of the wood grain. I've laid out my twine and my ribbon. I'm going to place my wood grain over top, and I'm going to pull these over and tie a double knot. So I want the knot to be over on the right hand side a little bit. Be sure not to pull too tightly. You don't want to tear your cardstock. And I'm going to tie it over one more time just to give myself a nice knot there. I'm going to take my scissors and cut off the excess. I've adjusted my ribbon and my twine where I'd like it on the card, and I've placed tape runner on the back of the wood grain. And I'm going to place that down on my card front. I've also placed tape runner on the back of my heart. I'm going to place that on my card, just a little bit of an angle, kind of up towards the left-hand corner. And just like I did with the cat card, I'm going to go ahead and cut out both of these dogs. And here are both of my images cut out, and I've put pattern paper on the back of both. I'm going to place the little Chow Chow dog down in the lower left-hand corner and put the little German Shepherd sort of over top of the heart. And here's the finished dog card. I really hope that you enjoyed both of these cards today. I think it's a really fun challenge to make yourself some cards with only pattern paper with no stamping. These papers from Stampin' Up! Make it really easy with the really cute images. And I love adding the little details like the embossing wood grain and the little faux stitching with the dies. It just adds some really nice depth to them. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Be sure to check out my channel and subscribe, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.